What's up, meta-nerds? This video is all about the Imperial Tanker, a fuel ship used during the time of the Galactic Civil War. If you watched our video on the Altor-class resupply ship, you know that massive tanker had 6 Star Destroyer-sized fuel tanks that could be used to refuel multiple Star Destroyers at a time, or even 2 Star Dreadnoughts at the same time. But if you look down in the comments, you also notice that there were a ton of people who both claim to be diehard Star Wars fans and think that the idea of ships needing fuel was just randomly thought up by Rian Johnson. Don't get me wrong, I'm thoroughly bored with the new trilogy as well, and agree that using running out of fuel as a plot point isn't the most exciting choice, but I truly don't get how people's minds work that they turn that into hatred towards the Altor, or my personal favorite, the conspiracy theorists who declare with certainty that this ship was a pathetic and blatant act of retconning by Disney just to save The Last Jedi. You know, which kind of misses a rather relevant fact that the Altor-class was introduced in the book The Essential Guide to Warfare back in 2012, a Legends book, making this Star Destroyer refueling vessel a Legends ship. But this whole debate did have me thinking about other forms of tanker ships in Star Wars. This of course led me to the Imperial Tanker. I think Rogue Squadron words it best, perfectly capturing the feeling that those fuel refuters may have had when they learned that it was a staple in Legends.
Rogue Leader, I'm getting a strange sensor reading. Might be Imperial.
Strange readings indeed, and Imperial it was, and in fact there were plenty of starfighters escorting these 7 tankers on their way to an Imperial prison in the Maw cluster. They could have been bringing fuel needed to just run the facilities, or fuel to keep in tankers at the prison in order to refuel the ships that delivered the prisoners and supplies there. It's also important to remember that stuff like Tabana gas was used in everything from blasters, turbo lasers, and TIE fighters, so these shipments may have been divided up to meet all of these different needs, acting as both ammunition and fuel. The ion engines would ionize atoms in the Tabana gas and accelerate them out the back in order to create thrust, while blasters would ionize the gas into a plasma that would be accelerated down the barrel as a deadly projectile. But it is important to stop here and point out that yes, even larger capital ships still needed fuel. In fact, people keep saying that the Star Destroyers have fusion reactors, but they don't. The Venators, ISDs, and Death Stars all have hypermatter annihilator reactors. The thing being annihilated would need to be replenished for continued annihilation, a process that I would boldly call refueling. In fact, the cross-section from the Venator tells us that 40,000 tons of fuel per second is annihilated at maximum power. There's that pesky F word again, but I would note that we don't know how dense the hypermatter is. For all we know, just 1 cubic meter weighs 40 tons. I said in the Altor-class video that what exactly these ships carried in their tanks and how fast ships consume fuel in Star Wars has never been given a lot of attention, even in obscure RPG books. We do see the Imperial Tanker over Bespin, and the Prima guide for this game says that many of these ships were used to remove enormous amounts of Tabana gas. That would be used for smaller ships and weapons, but also to refuel Star Destroyers. Their numerous turbo lasers would need Tabana, and they would also keep some Tabana for their TIE fighter complement. So even if the IT and Altor were just filled with Tabana, they of course would still be used to refuel Imperial capital ships, even if they didn't supply the actual hypermatter. That's why with the IT, we get an interesting look at how a supply chain could work. We only see the Altor at the highly defended spaceport of Valaducia, but it seems to be going to and from other highly secured areas. The IT would then fill up with the Altor, and then head out on much more dangerous missions. Each IT was only 150 meters or 492 feet long, about 1/10 of an ISD, while just a single tank on an Altor was nearly as large as a Venator. So though a loss of an Altor would be devastating, the loss of some Imperial tankers was much more acceptable. Because they were heading to the Maw installation prison, I would guess that it was Tabana gas in their tanks, but there is no reason to think that these tankers couldn't transport hypermatter. I get why people think that the ISD's reactor is fusion. It is described as a miniature sun, but it's been officially named for decades now in Legends, the IA-2B Solar Ionization Reactor. Yes, fusion reactors are too described as miniature suns, but it's called a solar ionization reactor, and in the lore, it is just a larger and more improved version of that found in the Venator, a reactor which we know uses up a lot of fuel. What solar ionization means exactly isn't ever fully explained, but what we know for certain is that it is not identical to fusion, and does require hypermatter as fuel, and has so for a long time in Legends. So that is why ships like the Imperial Tanker and the Altor-class resupply ship are crucial to understanding how the Imperial Navy worked. So that's it for the Imperial Tanker and some further explanation of fuel use in Star Wars. The only behind-the-scenes fact is that the IT appears in Rogue Squadron 2 and 3, and that I put some different links in the description that I used to make this video. The first is really good and actually makes an argument against fuel use, but you see later on in the page that trying to make sense of the sci-fi aspect of Star Wars lore starts to become impossible as different scenarios contradict each other. That's why I kept my argument simple, and it stems from things that we know for certain, that in Legends we have the existence of fuel tankers, lines that say that they fuel Star Destroyers, and we have rates at which certain Star Destroyers burn through fuel, and know that the ISD reactor is not fusion. So I conclude that the ISD would need to be refueled, and here are the ships that can do it. But still, it's a really cool read, gets into all kinds of great math and different comparisons. I plan on doing a video on the Valaducia and fuel in general coming up soon. There are some deleted scenes of fuel in a CIS capital ship in episode 3, and a lot of stuff in the Clone Wars that could be expanded upon, so keep an eye out for those videos. But that's it for the Imperial Tanker. If you want to connect with us, help support the channel, or get your own copies of the reference materials used to make these videos, be sure to check out the link in the description. Special shout out to our supporters over on Patreon, but most important of all, remember, you didn't fall in love with Star Wars because it was great sci-fi, and the Force will be with you, always.